Well, hey guys, it's me, Brandon, and this is I always hear everyone
Sierra.
every time. And this is our show, Small Talk is Lame, also known as Still, a platform in which we talk about things around digital distance, community, which is this season's kind of breath, and just how to be a better connector communicator within the people around you and the people that you have possibly yet to meet. So I know we had such a fun time last episode. Well, actually, it was the most interesting time because I felt like we were still in that, like, we were succinct, but we were very just like, this is my belief and this is my standing, this is my comprehension. And like, it was very, I loved it. So we kind of left that episode at a very interesting cliffhanger. I wouldn't even say a cliffhanger. Would you call it a cliffhanger?
I would definitely call it well, kind of. It was just like this is an obvious part two in the wings.
Yeah, yeah, and it does kind of tie into what this episode's going to be about, which is verbal and nonverbal con communication in a community setting, as a tongue tie, and then we kind of played around with the idea of um, the pronoun and its purpose. So I know when we finished about vulnerability and conformity or individuality and conformity, we had the subject come up around gender and identity and the pronouns that are now kind of there to support those communities and those lifestyles. And you were just like, do you want to like lean into that more?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. I might cough a few times. Yeah. So to restate kind of what I said at the end of the last video, I don't necessarily believe in using the incorrect pronouns, and definitely not the incorrect plural and or made up ones. A lot of there's some, what's funny is I've actually never experienced anybody who's had the sort of Zer kind of thing going on. Of course I
Okay.
know of it. I've seen it on YouTube and all the other stuff, but never actually come into contact with anyone who goes by that. But you know, I have come into contact with multiple people who definitely want to use he when they're actually a she or vice versa or they. I don't believe that it's doing anyone any favors to use pronouns that are inaccurate. And I personally, I like to be grammatically correct, and I don't want to tell a lie. And I think language matters, and that's where I stand on that.
Well, there you guys go. Still community. Wow. I mean, this is the first topic that I think we've ever talked about where we are somewhat on different spectrums. My spectrum is probably due to some misinformation and following a collective social construct, but do think around the category and its definition and the reason why it exists now does help people identify, or maybe it's a mental thing, or maybe even in your thought process it's a placebo thing. It's like, you want to call yourself this, but like genetically blah blah blah, phonetically, all those kind of reality pillars are just like, no, this is biology, not your beauty. um but I can't help but think about the psychological traumas and things like that this community, or the people who are in that pronoun category, what is their kind of experience like, and then how does that look in a community setting when you literally, like we talked about last week, like if you're gay, black, you couldn't do this, but that's in the past, but this isn't in the past. So I was like, I don't really know what to do. It does get tricky though, because I
It
feel like it's
does.
getting a little manipulative.
Tell me more about why you think it's manipulative. That's interesting.
Well, and this is not personally an experience that I personally had. It's an experience that I've heard from other people, where it's not selective, but it does present this level of convenience that people just like. It's almost like the BLM and the Me Too's, and do you know the roots in heart, or are you just kind of like just hanging on for the sake of hanging on because everybody's doing it? And I feel like we have started to get into this place where it's like sis, his, her, him, and them, boom. I'm like, okay.
So do you think it's It sounds like what you're trying to say is that you believe there are some people who are taking, or not taking advantage of, but overusing or
But
possibly
misusing.
exploiting
Yeah.
this avenue of pronoun stuff when it's not necessarily the best reflection of who they are.
Mhm. But then is that something that we should never be privy to thinking of, like in that regard? Like just because you use a pronoun makes me feel that you're not clear on who you are. Like I don't think that. Do you?
Well, I guess the difference here is compulsory, like are you
Mhm.
compulsed to say that? So it's one thing if this person wants to call themselves whatever pronoun that they use, which is silly because you can't really use a pronoun to speak about yourself in a conversation. That's not how grammar works. But if you impress upon me that I have to use these, well, I don't. I'm not a partaker in that because I don't.
Okay.
You can't force me what to say any more than I can't force you what to say, and I
True, true,
just I don't
true.
agree with that.
So, you know, there was one thing that I found and that I understand, like the easiest way to go around the pronoun, promenade is to just associate that person by their name. That's it. Not he, him, her, this, them, or they, just their name. Because I feel like the name is a real element of your identity, not your gender. And I feel like there's this big misunderstanding of like when you say gender, you don't mean identity. And when you say identity, you don't mean gender.
Yeah, I think those get conflated quite a bit, unfortunately. You're right about that. I'm not opposed to the name thing. I have had to do that quite a bit because I don't want to use the incorrect pronoun. So I have had to resort to names frequently. And it's not horrible, but it does still make you have to think. And the whole point is it doesn't solve the problem, I guess. I mean, not that it's a problem per se. It's not the best way to put it. Um, I'm always okay with using somebody's name, but resorting to, well, if you can't handle all the pronouns, there's still an issue here though, because this person is they have some sort of issue with their sense of self and their identity, and they are inflicting that issue on other people, right? Because even me having to be like, god, I have to use their name now. I have to reword all of my sentences so that when I speak to this person I'm using their name, and when I you know what I mean. So I just want to get to the root of the problem, which hovers around whether or not we should be bothered with all this at all. I don't know if we had like it's a drastic comparison, right? But if we had a schizophrenic person who was seeing things, because that's common, there's hallucinations. Would it do them any good to be like, oh yeah, I see that too, and like track around the room, like you can also see their hallucination, from a clinical sort of aspect. Like, does that do them more or less harm? You know, and I think continuing to play into the delusion, or at the very least not referencing that there is something going on and just trying to hide it and put a band-aid on it by using names, I don't think that does the person any good. I don't think it does the society, the portion of society that is troubled with this. I don't think it does them any good.
That was a lot of viewpoints. I I mean, I love when I like the fact that we kind of can be in this space about it because I
Yeah.
personally, again, am not fully versed and submerged into what that community and identities and even specificities of all of that really entails. So I don't want to do it improperly, but like we both said, like sometimes it's just easier to use someone's name. But I can see in a group setting, something like that, where there is a clear division of that. You know, there have been there's that uncomfortable like you know per person pronoun person select as you will. So there's this that's kind of why I was like, then it takes away this kind of like you know they
Mhm.
they get a choice but no one else does, is it kind of the thought process that I was kind of getting at. But um I really just wish it was a little simpler, but again, it goes back into this week's topic, which was verbal and nonverbal types of communication and how that works or doesn't work in a community setting. Um, I had to sit with this one because you think verbal and nonverbal are very clear, succinct, like da da da. But as I kind of did my homework, verbal is clearly the use of words and language in writing or talking to express one's self.
Mhm.
Like that's like the dictionary definition of it. But then you look at nonverbal, and it's almost like the lack of words, unable to express, but to I forgot what the way he said it, but it was like a different way to present. But
Yeah,
there's
like
no emotional.
eye contact, facial expressions, all the kind of stuff that when you go into a room and you read the room and you know everybody, or you're talking with your boss, or you're talking with your friend, and even without your friend saying anything about something is wrong, you can look at them and it's like there's something wrong. You know what I mean? Like that nonverbal
Yeah,
communication. 100%. Yeah, and I think specifically for obviously for verbal communication, that the whole gender pronoun stuff would fit very nicely in that avenue. Um, I think well, first of all, before we get to that, I want to back up and say that I think it's impressive for both of us coming from the two very opposite spectrums. We meant to point this out last episode, but having a conversation about all this stuff and being completely calm and being respectful with each other, and like that, it's very important that Brandon, of course, can have his views. I can have my views. We can talk about those views together and to you guys as an audience, and we don't have to be at each other's throats. We don't have to be nasty, speaking over each other. There don't have to be um you know no personal insults flying, none of that. It was just, these are my views, here's some questions, these are your views, and it was very cordial. And I think we could continue along that path, and it's very important for people to see that you can have this discussion and be mellow about it. That's ultra important.
yeah, yeah. Like I agree. Like I think this is the point of why we do what we do and why we talk about the things that we talk about, because not saying that we are always trying to set ourselves up to have these moments of quote unquote conflict, but I
Mhm.
do think it is important for us to cross barriers and go over certain unknown territories, especially as proof to say that we are literally kind of blooming and building and kind of connecting our friendships and how we work and how we live in our lives, and learning about each other at the same time authentically without ego. I mean, I am still processing a lot of stuff. So, but I
Right.
think it is important that, in any of these kind of discussions or inspirations that we leave you guys, is that I have to learn to listen. So, like, listening is my biggest token when it comes to something that I may not understand or vibe with. So,
Exactly. Same
that's
here,
kind of
actually.
my takeaway.
But yeah, I think as far as both verbal and nonverbal communication, um, I think the concept of gender and personality get conflated quite a bit. And I know you're thinking, well, how is she going to tie communication in with this stuff? And it's like, well, I think one of the strongest arguments for gender is that when someone walks into a room, they present themselves a certain way. And you can look at them and there's something external about how they express themselves and the way they move and they talk and they dress that should be convincing that, if you're going to use the gender argument, that they are of, whatever gender they want to be perceived as. So if you're a male, but you want to be perceived as female, you're going to walk the walk, talk the talk, put on the right clothes, all those things. And then those nonverbal sort of cues should be enough for other people to pick up and follow along, right? And I don't I don't know. I think that it's not um I understand how those can get conflated, right? Because there's the
Yeah.
argument between gender and sex and how personality sort of intersects between the two. I would argue that gender was just, I mean, I think it was just like a made up thing. Um, it was, well, yeah, I forget I think it was John Money who made that up. Yeah, but he was a weird guy. So I think he didn't have the best of motives when he was coming up with some of this stuff. And I think if we just
Mm,
stick to sex and personality, that actually covers all the bases, and gender is sort of muddies the waters. Because when you walk into a room and you look at someone, I think that the way they present themselves and the way they conduct themselves with other people, all those nonverbal cues, actually speaks more to their personality more than anything else. Because for
mm,
me, right, when I was a kid, I presented quite a bit as a tomboy, right? I didn't, and I still to this day don't like feminine colors. I don't wear feminine clothing most of the time. I mean, I have worn dresses in the past, but like just in general, right? Um, my lifestyle has always been very like utilitarian. So I do a
mm,
lot with my hands, with my body. My clothing tends to reflect that because I like to live in comfort and utility, and therefore like a great reason. I don't wear dresses because I feel like I can't defend myself in a dress. I feel insecure in a
mm,
dress. So I don't wear feminine clothing like that. I want pockets, so I wear a lot of like athleisure jeans and stuff like that. Um, I don't feel comfortable in skirts for the same reason I don't like dresses, right? My clothing tends to reflect more of my personality and my personal choices rather than what has to do with my body. And so I
mm,
think the way that I also will conduct myself around people, I definitely I won't say it's like more masculine per se, but I'm not a girly girl. You know, I think I'm a pretty grounded individual. I have a strong handshake. I look people in the eyes. A lot of people would take those traits and align them with masculinity. But I think it just had to do with the way that I was raised and that I joined the military. And when you're in the military, some of those things are just they're required by regulation because you have to regulate everything in the Navy, even how you interact with other people. And so there's so much practice in all of that. So that's a great example of how I could be perceived as maybe non-binary or possibly even more on the masculine side of the spectrum. But in all reality, that's just my
mm.
personality, you know? Because I don't have any confusion as to who I am and why I am the way that I am. You know
Right.
what I mean? I know that was a lot,
I guess
but I think that just
I,
just
I know,
you know? What do you think?
yeah, no, I totally picked up when you were putting down. I honestly think that there is more to that final like final word. Like sex is identity and knowing who you are and things like that. Those components all do have to kind of synergize to kind of make that statement more definitive. Um, but I think that's also where we have gotten away from everything because we've allowed these additional ingredients to justify one, you know, one pillar of identity. Um, so it's like a double-edged sword. I agree with you. Like I think it is kind of muddy, and I think if we did kind of break it down and simplify it, but again, it's like how we have evolved as people. We've evolved as a species, a society. A friend of mine was telling me, this is completely off topic, but I thought it was interesting that once upon a time, we as human beings thrived around being in groups and connecting with one another. That's literally how we started to get some of our happy, like our oxytocin, our dopamine, or all of those kind of feel good things to kind of make us move through society as normal, happy people. But now research has shown that we now don't really need to seek that out. We can give it to ourselves and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's interesting that once upon a time we thought we had to be one thing, and now we've learned that there's other arenas of introduction of awareness, identity, and classifications. But when is it enough?
Well, I have one small point on that without getting too much into the weeds on that topic. Um,
Yeah.
has the evolution changed and occurred? Yes. I think the
Mm,
right question though is that better for us as a species? Is
mm,
that doing us the most good? That I actually disagree with. I don't because we used to be very tribal. That was just the nature of living because you had to. And then
mhm,
of course society has grown and evolved and modernized and to the point that we're at now where you don't have to be a giant tribe anymore. However, I do think that there is a certain security and um lightness and goodness that comes in life when you have like a solid family connection, you know, or if you don't, if for whatever reason, if there's a sad situation where you don't have family, for whatever reason,
Mm.
having a lot of good friends or people that you could call family. And I think the tribe has just gone from large to small. And it's good to have those things rather than being on your own. I don't think it's the best model to be always doing that for ourselves.
I yes, I do agree with you there. I just thought it was interesting that you know everyone's there is that rhetoric like find your tribe. There is
Yep.
that like yeah that kind of stuff, and I still believe in that. But I think also that goes down to the same thing around introverts, extroverts, ambiverts, all that kind of stuff. But in this case, um, back to like verbal and nonverbal, I think all of the things that you really were classifying were just some nonverbals that people try to make a verbal expression. And like, I'm not trying to, like, if I was going to express this, it'd be a verbal form of expression, but what I wear, how I dress, how I look, and things like that are not these, it's not me communicating for you to kind of me of my one self. It's like, that's what it is. Like, I don't need to express that. But I think it's interesting how on to an experience that's always going to be the opposite. Someone's going to try to put you in this tomboy thought process because of their nonverbal comprehension, but your intention around nonverbal was not to be like, yeah, please consider me non-binary or this, that, and the other. That wasn't your expression. So I think it's interesting how.
We'll say that again or elaborate on that because I'm not entirely sure. Are you saying that that the people's choice to sort of change the exterior of how they present themselves has nothing to do with them trying to communicate with the outside world? Like they're
No,
not the
I
same?
think it does, but I just no, 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 no. I think it does. I think it's actually it's kind of like a give and take. It has to like there are push and pull moments because, like you said, you're not intentionally trying to express anything non-verbally with your choices, present like everything else like that. And when you do want to express something of yourself, it is something you speak. You
Oh,
claim
okay.
that moment with words and language. So, but on the other side of it, as someone who is experiencing you or approaching you, or whatever the case may be, my comprehension of nonverbals lead me to express the wrong the wrong categories and assumptions. So I feel like in communities, is that a constant battle? And you know, what is that supposed to look like when, it's a unified front or like-minded individuals or, political or something of legacy and worth? It's like, how do those things work? It's kind of
Right.
the thought process.
Yeah, that's fair. I could totally see how that would be. It's interesting. And I think what you're trying to get at is sometimes it is the case and sometimes it's not. And that's the tricky part. And so I think the argument there comes back to motive in a way, not motive in like a malicious sense, but there could be
Hmm.
a genuine, miscommunication with me, right? In my case, or if you want to talk about like I guess a more extreme case would be someone who is trying to be either male or female passing, right? I think
Hmm.
that would very intentional, right? And then the art, if you want to take those apart, the difference would be, one person is very much trying to convince of their own reality, and the other one is not. And that's, I don't know. I think that's the whole band aid problem, right? I think if
Hmm.
we weren't so accepting of something that should be considered I would say something is wrong, possibly mental disorder or comorbidities, other things that are layered causing this one problem. I don't
Hmm.
think we should be normalizing that. You know, there's been a lot of research done, and most I would say most people were speaking of people who are not they don't conform to the sex that they are, and they want to present a certain way. They have other mental disorders. A lot of them they have some sort of dissociative identity disorder. There's depression. There's different. There's a lot of stuff going on. I forgot the other one I was trying to use, but I don't. I think we shouldn't take that lightly and just let that be normalized in society. I don't think that's helpful. I think if someone has something wrong, they should get help. Rather than just like I said, kind of going along with the delusion, you know?
And I think that's coming from a perspective of an observer instead of a person in that internal experience. I do, however, think that it is. I don't think it's a sickness. I don't think it's a disease. I think it's the same type of component that we have now made it a little bit more difficult, but it's the same filtration. It's like if someone identifies as a Christian, if someone identifies as a pagan, if someone identifies as these quote unquote pronouns or identities, um, in addition to their individuality, I guess, um, where is the difference? You know, like a doctor who is now a gets their doctorate and now they're doctor so and so. You know how they now have this identity. Um, where is the line? So why is the line so drawn? Because technically, people could say, "I please address me as a Christian Black African American male." You know, like those can be that could be the new thing. So when it comes to someone saying, "I'm actually a they," or "I'm a she," or "this is he," you know what I mean?
Well, no, I do, and I don't think the examples that you gave are I don't think those are synonymous arguments, you know? Like,
Okay.
doctor, that's a very commonly used one. That's a not only is that your job title, that's your I mean, you have a degree to back it up, and no one goes around to random people and insisting that they call you Doctor So and So. You know, I mean, not. I mean,
Mhm.
you could be a tyrant and you could be rude, but like not a lot of people are doing that. I don't think so. But I would bring it back, just because I personally don't have that experience of having issues with my self identity. It doesn't mean that I can't say that I believe it's a disorder that's going on, because even though I don't have depression, I think if someone has depression, that is a mental issue and they should seek help. So it doesn't have to
Mhm.
affect me for me to be able to think that way, right?
Diagnosed. Yeah, of
If I
course, absolutely.
someone with a broken leg and I think that they should go get treatment, that I don't have to have a broken leg myself to be able to say that.
No, I agree. No, I think, yeah, and I think I wasn't trying to spin or change that comprehend my comprehension on it. I think it's just interesting because I feel like yes, there's so much two step, one step in this whole narrative. Um, because I also don't want to take away that component of like feeling good in your skin and knowing who you are, whatever that may be. I do think there are some things around reality and tangible grasp to it. Like
Mhm.
you cannot be a tree, like a tree is a tree. You can't be a blade of grass, even though we are, in some faiths and practices, we are one of all things. But either way, I, it's like I sometimes ask myself, like, what if it wasn't called a pronoun? What if it's just part of your, like it just changed? Would not okay, maybe that sounds a little retarded. Not retarded. Um, that sounds a little redundant. But like we've made such a big deal about it, and now it has run amok, and it's starting really young, and that was kind of my big scary thing about it too, because it's put leaders, teachers, and people of importance, public figures, being like, I don't know what to do, but I will be crucified if I get it wrong.
Yeah, no, that's real, and that's I agree with you there that that's a problem for sure. Well, and I think the way that we can take a step forward to at least clear the waters that are muddy right now is
Mm.
sort of parsing out what might be like, just going back and forth, you and me. What do you think would actually fall under the idea? Like, what kind of um, traits or behaviors or anything would fall under the idea of gender? Because that's sort of what you were getting at just now when you were talking about the pronoun stuff, and then you're like, well, maybe that's not the right. You sort of have to really label and figure out what do you perceive even constitutes gender.
And we talked about this, I think, in like episode 2, like the definition of gender of how it isn't related to your biology per se. or something to that effect.
Well,
I'm trying to dig through my notes really fast to find it, but um, I think that it's almost like what are the characteristics that make gender gender?
yeah. What do you think?
Well, I think a little bit has to do with gender is a scientific term, I'm assuming. So there has to be some type of science and biology to back it up, but that also is subjective because now you can have operations using science to then change your biological gender per se. Um, so I think again, this one is a loaded thought process because it's a loaded gun that can fire right back at you as soon as you shoot your first bullet. But I think science is a key component. Mindset is another one, and behavior.
Okay, so those are very general, but like if you were well how do you think gender would then be parsed out from personality? How are they different?
Well, gender and personality, I think, live on the same block, but they have never met each other. I think that personality, once you identify the gender of comfortability, I guess, or your gender, just your brain, blah blah blah, all that kind of scientific jargon, blah blah. Once you know what that is and identify and let whatever social constructs and environmental, data align you saying this is what I'm associating and I'm seeing other people in the same way, this is what they do, I should act like and become like, or find my path that's similar to theirs, or behavioral. I think in mostly nonverbals too. Like men don't cry, or masculinity isn't weak. Femininity is, you know, they're very loving and nurturing. Men are not. Like, all those terms. I think it's the same thing around this whole like what makes up the connection to gender and what allows people to kind of claim it so freely.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're kind of describing some things. It sounds like you're trying to describe what would typically be called masculinity and femininity and traits and behaviors
Mhm.
that fall under those two umbrellas. So then
Mm.
if that's your argument, then you sort of have to go, okay, where does masculinity and femininity come from? That's the next question. If we're going to go back to sort of a first principles line of thinking, where why do we call certain things feminine and why do we call certain things masculine? Where does that come from? Do you think that's a fair
Um, it is a fair question, but I think it's also a philosophical one. I feel like that one can be an ever evolving, ever changing, ever encompassing of interpretation because there's too many. We've allowed so much expansion on the topic and the idea and the kind of the comprehension. We've taken identity, we've taken sexuality, we've taken race, we've taken all these very previously definitive thoughts and definitions of life and function and just as a society. And now we've made them a little bit more expanded. And I don't know if that's helpful to communities or the development of community basis support, or if it's just kind of like this is what creates ostracization, this is what recreates those counterfeit communities, toxic communities, and things like that, as we talked about in the previously. So it's like how does one and this is just one topic, guys, that we were super harped on. I think the other things that we should kind of touch on is like in specific categories of a community, whether it's race, political, mindset, um, or status, I was like, well, which of those communication styles is effective? Which is the most go-to when you're in a setting that people should like check in with themselves, identify who they belong or who they should fit in with. But if they're a bunch of nonverbals and you're a verbal communicator, again, I think that's going to be something that you have to kind of be like, this is my people.
Restate your question one more time. Sorry about how you like what are the things you should pick from to choose this? What like say it again? It's
Basically, the concept was around nonverbal and verbal communication techniques within a community, and how the individual person is trying to connect with said community. If they're a verbal communicator, just phonetically, but they're in a community or an option for a community that is nonverbal, like just what does that look like? And in certain community demographics, whether, like I said, race, politics, or status, what are the effective or ineffective ways that you've seen verbal and nonverbal communication in their expressions, I guess?
Well, I guess going back to what the first thing you said, verbal versus or verbal and nonverbal communities. I'm a little out of what would you consider to be a nonverbal community?
I guess that was not the right way to kind of just classify them, but like the use of verbal and nonverbal communication technique and
Oh,
style.
thank
Yeah.
you, please. Okay. And so the point being, let's see, uh what's the most useful strategy or knowing how and
Well,
when
like
to switch, knowing being able to read certain things? Like what's the angle here?
I guess the angle that I'm trying to get at is where have you seen more of one versus the other? Like when you're the new person coming into a new group, of course, there's always that silence that you have to kind of experience. And that's the size up, and that's the nonverbal communications. And usually it is in a group setting or a community, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, there are other communities that are like, no, we'll talk to you. Come right up to your face and we'll engage with you and we'll express ourselves and you'll get to know me by the words that I use in the language that we are talking to each other in. You know,
Mhm.
which have you seen and gravitated towards more? Did you go through like you went to the military? A lot of that is kind of like silent, size you up, look you up, not a
I
word
mean,
needs to be said.
I would argue that you get quite a bit of that in every community or group, and it's a matter of which one you want to see. And I would argue there's actually more nonverbal communication in some of the overly verbally expressive and communicative groups. So the ones who are very um, eager to interact and do exchange and do things like that, as much as I like that's welcoming and appreciative on my side. I always tend to sit back and I'm like, I watch. And the people who say the most reveal the most about themselves in the nonverbal ways because I feel like there's always like this overcompensation going on. And so it's less for me, it's
Mhm.
less about what I hear actually and more about what I see. So when someone has a whole lot to say, it's not that I stopped listening because that's not the case. I always listen because there's important things you should keep your ears open for. But I definitely noticed that their actions and their behaviors tend to portray their words, and that's for me. Like it's very important for me to always be watchful. I think in general, communication, like of course, communication is verbal and that's important, and you should be you should be careful with your words, right? Like words should mean things, and when you're
Mhm.
communicating, you should communicate effectively, and you should communicate truthfully and efficiently, right? And people who can do that, but then their actions don't back it up, that shows itself very quickly, And so that person might appear as a good communicator, but then it falls apart the second that their actions don't back it up. Or it could be the other way. That I've seen instances where the people are horrible communicators. They don't have a whole lot of social skills. They're very introverted, and the thing is, though, they do whatever the little that they say, they do, and the little
Mhm.
that they expect, they really do expect it, and they will be hurt and let down if something does not go according to what they expected to go. Because for them, what they said, that was like that was it. That was the truth. And so if we're just talking about like a job, they're like, hey, I just need you to do this thing and they don't say anything else. Like it's just very to the point, not a whole lot of stuff going on, right? And then you don't do that thing, well, that's gonna feel like a boulder to them. Whereas
Well, yeah.
I've also experienced leaders who say a whole lot of craziness, and then maybe you don't even follow through with like half of what they say, and they don't even notice. So I think you have to have a balance of both to really be the most perceptive and prosperous.
Okay. I mean, I can see the avenue of your thought, and I I get it. I also do feel like by the experiences and environments in which we have developed in as people, that does shape how we express ourselves verbally and non-verbally. I think, if you were a person who was in a more solitary, singular, very small, but very involved and connected, and had a lot more in depth of its purpose and practices, I think, yeah, your verbal style is going to be very, clear and non-interpretive and less subjective for interpretation because you're not interpreting, you're defining and declaring and
Mm,
kind of your thought process and presentations of yourself and your oneness. But I do think now, as a society, and even and as communities grow, change, evolve, break up, or whatever, I do think, especially in digital communities, is that that verbal communication is a muscle that has not been exercised very well because people
it's true.
misunderstand. People now use nonverbal or like imagery, which is not written word or language, to kind of communicate these like nonverbal in a verbal type of setting. Isn't that weird? Like an emoji technically to me is a nonverbal,
Kind of, yeah. I
but
would agree with you. Emojis or GIFs are another good one, or memes. Well, memes might be
mhm,
verbal because sometimes they have words, but yeah, emojis is a very good one. And I think the other thing I've noticed with I would say the younger generation of people now, like I want to say maybe either my age or slightly younger to about maybe teenagers, 15, 16-year olds. Um,
mhm.
they don't have the capability to, or I would say it's lessened. Um, not capability. They have less of a tolerance for um, confrontational discourse. So something that might sort of challenge an internal view that they have. And so when they're met with this um, verbal conflict, it degenerates quite quickly to name calling and personal attacks, and
Oh, okay.
they
Mhm.
lose that capacity to just like hold on, we can talk, and it goes straight to emotional avenues, and I've that's the
Yeah.
degeneracy that I've noticed in this younger generation, and I think it's very concerning. Actually, I'm worried about it.
Well, the funny thing is, as soon as you started into this thought process, I was like, oh my God, yeah, people that are younger are very quick to hot. Like, and you're just kind of like, this was not meant to upset you to the point where you feel like you have to like fight or flight. And even trying to bring them to a level in which you can start to instill a development of talking through their emotional regulation moments is such an exhaustion because it's like you are so hot right now and this was literally like this big of a moment in time or of accountability or something like that, but it is one or nothing. It is 0 to 100. And I don't know if that has, yeah, I don't know what that leads to as a futuristic around society connections, disassociations, disconnections, all that kind of stuff. Will the power of community be very here today, gone tomorrow? Like,
Right. I think a lot of, not to go
um,
on a tangent right at the end of the episode, but I mean, I do think that has a lot to do with parenting. Um, and it even kind of goes back into the verbal, nonverbal stuff. Screen time is a big deal. Like, what kind of nonverbal signal are you sending your kid that when you're around the house and you have like a 2-year old that you'd rather give them an iPad to keep them busy, that so that you can go clean the house, then engage your 2-year old and try to figure out how to do both. That sends a huge, and kids, they're so smart. They look for that. They know, like 2, 3, 4, 5-year old, like they see that and they start to understand, right? And that's I'm not trying to call parents out and say you're a bad mom or whatever, but I'm just saying to the kid, that's like, okay, this is the important thing, not mom, when I get rowdy, I get a screen. Okay, cool. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what kind
mm,
of signal
mhm,
is
mhm.
that's nuts. And I think
It's
they,
yeah, it's not a signal.
yeah, right. And so I just think that oh man, it
It starts
takes
somewhere. There's a core.
well, it takes away the parent's ability to teach that kid emotional regulation from the get-go, right? because they're the second that that
Yeah.
kid is dysregulated, they get a screen, like, what is
And
that?
then they get soothed. And then they get soothed with another nonverbal. They get soothed with the iPad, or they get soothed with so this is where I was talking about, like, when is a nonverbal in a situation or setting effective or ineffective? Now, again, I think it's deeper where we talk about, like, understanding the just the components of psychology, no matter what the human psychology, and how our brain, whether infant to adolescent to elderly, there's still elements in which it can be managed, and we still have so many things to that we can self-regulate. I'm on this very neuroscientist journey of understanding what the brain does and how it kind of helps protect certain things around mental health. But um, yeah, the same thing is like start young, because like just like people or parents are teaching their children about money, wealth, and finance at a much younger age, and they are now in a level of I didn't know that shit at 13, or stocks and things like that. I
Right.
was shocked that I had a friend who was 21 who bought his own condo at 21. I was like, who are you?
Yep.
But because they were taught stocks, and they were taught the financial world and how to run the system. So I think all things that are meant to that are not not going to stop for us as a species, but just evolve because that's just the nature of the beast. Is that when it comes to these verbal and nonverbal styles and connections and practices of one versus the other, I think nonverbal is the way that is starting to allow people to think that digital distance is communicating. Small talk is connection. Um, you know, People just kind of being like, hi, how are you? How are you? Oh no, I talked to my best friend. Did you really though? Because that
Yeah.
all felt very nonverbal.
Well, I would say maybe not,
not
nonverbal, but
not specifically.
it wasn't, you know, there was no substance to that conversation. I think a good point that you're making is that um, the deepness and the connectivity and the substance of our relationships has been diluted over time,
Yeah.
and I
Or
think
it
we should get
takes it
back to
takes or it takes a massive shift. Like I used to always say, like sometimes family only comes together for either um, family or funeral, or a party, a birthday or a funeral. Sometimes it's just the nature that has kind of evolved. And even for me personally, I just recognize that I have these nonverbal blinders on, where it's like you need to verbalize your connections with your friends and family and your network and your support. You can't just say they exist but not express and communicate with them. It doesn't, that is not how you support your communities with your verbal or nonverbal, technique and
yeah.
language. But um, it's an interesting call to action. I think for people who are listening, things like that. It's like, in your life, do you think that you've been so nonverbal that you don't even realize that you keep saying, "Oh no, I'm going to call so it's on. I'm thinking about so you're on my mind," but you haven't expressed it, and you haven't really kind of really genuinely communicated and connected with them. But in your nonverbal self, in your nonverbal cues, um, you feel connected to them. But is that really a genuine connection, especially with where we are and what's happening and how our younger generation is from 0 to 100 when it comes to difficult or our happy emotions? They can be really jazzed, and you're like, "Whoa, it's just a cookie," and you're like, "Bring it down." And then
Yeah.
they feel they feel scared to express themselves when people like us kind of be like, "Hey, you're going crazy town." I've seen that too.
Yep.
So that's a double-edged
I
sword.
agree.
But again, I think this was a hard topic. I don't know how about you, but these were all very difficult. Yep, you can't finish the word.
uh I think I've put a lot of thought into my stance on most of this, and so for me, it wasn't a difficult discussion. I'm very clear in how I define certain things as far as my understanding of it, and so for me, it wasn't too crazy. I feel like there was even more to dive into, to be honest. We have a time crunch, obviously, but if
Yeah.
we would like to pick this up at a later
Oh,
date, I think
for the
there's
rec-
definitely more to
yeah.
uncover for sure.
And for the record, listeners, Sierra was jazzed about this topic. I
Yeah.
just happened to catch like a hot French fry out of a fryer, but she was jazzed about this idea. And I was like, okay. And I'm, the ops person and thinking like, how does it all connect? And, da-da-da. And I was like, okay, let's do it here. But I knew she was gonna hit me with the 1-2. I knew she was gonna be like, so in my thesis and thesaurus and thought process, this is where I stand. And it was going to either make me feel like I can't spell, but so far I only got one call out, I think non-verbally, but anyway, I think this was fun. I feel like we should learn more from our community, and I apologize to you guys now. I think Sierra and I both are just like very busy people, but our social media is so sad,
Oh
and we
yeah.
miss you guys. And we do have a Reddit page, and we did get our stuff connected to Apple Podcasts. But we are just amazingly difficultly difficultly busy people. But I promise, our Instagram, our Facebook, or even our
Mhm.
Reddit page, you'll start to hear from us and see from us. But connect with us anyway. Still podcast on Instagram. Small Talk is Lame if you can't find it because those can be very difficult. Same thing with YouTube and Facebook. Um, so yeah, Sierra. Oh, you know, I'm gonna be home soon. Actually, I told you, December 23rd.
No, I'm so excited for that actually. Unfortunately, I don't think we're gonna do any filming, unfortunately. This is just a quick visit. But man,
Yeah,
because I miss our in-person sessions so much, and we will get
I
back
do
to that.
too. But good news is I moved and things
Yeah.
have like I'm in an apartment and things have the first tornado of sand has settled and now we're moving into another one and we found an attorney for our case. So yeah, I'm very happy about all this stuff. But
Nice. So yeah, find us on our socials and definitely leave a comment down below if you agree or disagree or have a viewpoint that you'd like to express about this video. And we're not afraid of dialogue. So yeah, feel free to comment on
no,
this and
we
put it
encourage
on
you.
the page, and we want to hear from you guys.
Yeah, hashtag small talk same or hashtag still.
Yeah. All right.
Well, until next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye guys.